The Mercury-Redstone 4 was the second United States human spaceflight on July 21, 1961. The suborbital Project Mercury flight was launched with a Mercury-Redstone Launch Vehicle, the MRLV-8. The spacecraft, Mercury Capsule number 11, was nicknamed the Liberty Bell 7 and was piloted by the astronaut Virgil Grissom. The spaceflight lasted 15 minutes 30 seconds. It reached an altitude of more than 102.8 nautical miles, and it flew 262.5 nautical miles, downrange, landing in the Atlantic Ocean. The flight went as expected until just after splashdown, when the hatch cover, designed to release explosively in the event of an emergency, accidentally blew. Grissom was at the risk of drowning, but he was recovered safely via a U.S. Navy helicopter. The spacecraft sank into the Atlantic and was not recovered until 1999. The Liberty Bell 7 spacecraft, Mercury spacecraft number 11, was designed to fly the second manned suborbital flight in October 1960. It came off McDonnell's St. Louis production line in May 1960. Liberty Bell 7 was the first Mercury operational spacecraft with a centerline window instead of two portholes. It was closer to the final orbital version than was Alan Shepard's Freedom 7. Dubbed Liberty Bell 7, it featured a white, diagonal, irregular paint stripe, starting at the base of the capsule and extending about 2/3 towards the nose, emulating a crack in the famed Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In January 1961, NASA's director of the Space Task Group, Robert Gilruth, told Gus Grissom that he would be the primary pilot for Mercury 4. John Glenn was the backup pilot for the mission. Redstone Launch Vehicle MRLV-8 arrived at Cape Canaveral on June 8, 1961. A mission review on July 15, 1961, pronounced Redstone Mercury MRLV-8 and Mercury Spacecraft 11 ready to go for the Mercury 4 mission. Also, on July 15, 1961, Gus Grissom announced he would name the Mercury 4 Liberty Bell 7. Grissom said the name was an appropriate call sign for the bell-shaped spacecraft. He also said the name was synonymous with freedom. The Mercury 4 mission was planned as a repeat of the MR3. It was to reach an apogee of 116 miles. The planned range was 299 miles. Grissom would experience a maximum acceleration of 6.33 Gs and a deceleration of 10.96 Gs. The launch of the Liberty Bell 7 was first planned for July 16th. The cloud cover was too thick and the launch was postponed until July 18th. On July 18th, it was again postponed due to weather. Both times, the pilot had not yet boarded the spacecraft. On July 19, 1961, Grissom was on board when the flight was delayed again due to weather. At that point, it had just 10 minutes 30 seconds to go before launch. On the morning of July 21, 1961, John Grissom entered the Liberty Bell 7 at 8:58 UTC, and the 70 hatch bolts were put into place. At 45 minutes prior to the scheduled launch, a pad technician discovered that one of the hatch bolts was misaligned. During a 30-minute hold that was called, McDonnell and NASA Space Task Group engineers decided that the 69 remaining bolts should be sufficient to hold the hatch in place and blow at the appropriate time. The misaligned bolt was not replaced. Liberty Bell 7 was launched at 12:20 UTC on July 21, 1961. Grissom later admitted that the post-flight debriefing that he was a bit scared at liftoff, but he added that he soon gained confidence along with the acceleration increase. Hearing the engine roar at the pedestal, he thought that his elapsed time clock had started late. Like Shepard, he was amazed at the smooth quality of the liftoff, but he noticed gradually more severe vibrations. These were never violent enough to impair his vision. Grissom's cabin pressure sealed off at the proper altitude, about 27,000 feet, and he felt elated that the environmental control system was in good working order. The suit and the cabin temperatures, respectively about 57.5 and 97 degrees, were quite comfortable. Watching his instruments for the pitch rate of the Redstone, Grissom saw it followed directions as programmed, tilting over about 1 degree a second. During a 3G acceleration on the up leg of his flight, Grissom noticed a sudden change in the color of the horizon, from light blue to jet black. His attention was distracted by the noise of the tower jettisoning rockets firing on schedule. Grissom felt the separation, and he watched the tower through the window as it drifted off, trailing smoke, to his right. At 2 minutes and 20 seconds after launch, the Redstone's Rocketdyne engine cut off after building a speed of 6,561 feet per second. Grissom had a strong sensation of the tumbling during the transition from high to zero acceleration, and while he had become familiar with the sensation in the centrifuge training, for a moment he lost his bearings. The Redstone coasted for 10 seconds after its engine cut off, then a sharp report signaled that the Posigrade rockets were popping the spacecraft loosed from its booster. Although Grissom peered out of his window through the ship's turnover maneuver, he never caught sight of his booster. With turnabout accomplished, the Air Force jet pilot for the first time became a space pilot, assuming manual proportional control. A constant urge to look out the window made concentrating on his control tasks difficult. He told Shepard back in Mercury Control that the panorama of Earth's horizon, presenting at 800 miles arc at peak altitude, was fascinating. His instruments rated a poor second to the spectacle below. Turning reluctantly to his dials and control stick, Grissom made a pitch movement change, but was past his desired mark. He jockeyed for the hand controller stick for the position, trying to damp out all oscillations, then made a yaw movement and went too far in that direction. By the time the proper altitude was attained, the short time allocated for these maneuvers had been used, so he omitted the roll maneuver altogether. Grissom found that the manual controls were very sluggish when compared to the Mercury Procedures Trainer. He then switched to the new rate command control system and found perfect response, although the fuel consumption was high. After the pitch and the yaw maneuvers, Grissom made a rollover maneuver so that he could see the ground from his window. Some land beneath the clouds, apparently in a hazy distance, but the pilot was unable to identify it. Suddenly, Cape Canaveral came into view, so clearly that Grissom found it hard to believe that his slant range was over 150 miles. He saw Marriott Island, the Banana River, the Indian River, and what appeared to be a large airport runway south of Cape Canaveral. He saw what he believed to be West Palm Beach. With Liberty Bell 7 at an altitude of 118.26 miles, it was now time to position the spacecraft in its re-entry altitude. Grissom had indicated that the retro-rocket sequence and the spacecraft was arcing downward. His pulse reached 171 beats per minute. Retrofire gave him the distance and particular feeling that he had reversed his backwards flight through space and was now actually moving forward. As he plummeted downward, he saw what appeared to be two of the spent retro rockets pass across the periscope view after the retro rocket package had been jettisoned, pitching the spacecraft over into re-entry altitude of 14 degrees from Earth vertical. The pilot tried to see the stars out of his observation window. Instead, the glare of the sunlight filled his cabin, making it difficult to read the panel dials, particularly those with blue lights. Grissom thought that he would not have noticed the 0.05 G's light if he had not known it was about to flash on. Re-entry presented no problem. Grissom could not feel the oscillations following the acceleration buildup. He could only read them on the rate indicators. Meanwhile, he continued to report to the Mercury Control Center on his electric current reading, fuel quantity, acceleration, and other instrument indications. Condensation and smoke trailed off the heat shield at about 65,000 feet. as Liberty Bell 7 plunged back into the atmosphere. The drogue parachute deployed on schedule at 21,000 feet. Grissom said that he saw the deployment and felt some resulting pulsating motion, but not enough to worry him. The main parachute deployment occurred at 12,300 feet, which was about 1,000 feet higher than the design normal altitude. Watching the main chute unfurl, Grissom spotted a 6-inch L-shaped tear and another 2-inch puncture in the canopy. Although he worried about them, the holes grew no larger, and his rate of deceleration soon slowed to about 28 feet per second. Dumping his peroxide control fuel, the pilot began transmitting his panel readings. Splashdown. A clunk confirmed that the landing bag had been dropped in preparation for the impact. Grissom then removed his oxygen hose and opened his visor, but deliberately left the suit ventilation hose attached. Impact was milder than he expected, although the spacecraft heeled over in the water until Grissom was lying on his left side. He thought he was facing downward. The spacecraft gradually righted itself, and as the windows cleared the water, Grissom jettisoned the reserve parachute and activated the rescue aid switch. Liberty Bell 7 still appeared to be watertight, though it was rolling badly in the swells. Preparing for recovery, he disconnected his helmet and checked himself for debarkation. The neck dam did not unroll easily. Grissom tinkered with his suit collar to ensure his buoyancy in the event that he had to get out of the spacecraft quickly. After logging the panel data, Grissom asked the helicopters to begin the approach for pickup. He removed the pin from the hatch-covered detonator and laid back in the couch. He said afterwards, "I was lying there minding my own business when I heard a dull thud. The hatch cover blew away and the salt water swished into the spacecraft as it bobbed in the ocean. The capsule began taking on water and was sinking fast. He had earlier unbuckled himself from most of his harnesses. He now removed his helmet, grasped the instrument panel with his right hand, and climbed through the hatchway." The co-pilot of the nearest recovery helicopter said that Grissom climbed through the hatch and swam away. Leaving aside the swimming astronaut, Lewis completed his approach to the sinking spacecraft, as both he and Reinhardt were intent on spacecraft recovery. This action was a conditioned reflex based on the past training experience. While training off the Virginia beaches, the helicopter pilots had noticed that the astronauts seemed at home in and to enjoy the water. So Reinhardt quickly cut the high-frequency antenna as soon as the helicopter reached Liberty Bell 7. Throwing aside the antenna and cutting the device, Reinhardt picked up the shepherd's hook recovery pole and carefully threaded the crook through the recovery loop on the top of the spacecraft. By this time, Lewis had lowered the helicopter to assist Reinhardt in his task to a point that the helicopter's 3 wheels were in the water. The capsule sank out of sight, but the pickup pole tangled as the attached cable were taut, indicating that the helicopter pilots that they had made the catch. Reinhardt immediately prepared to pass the floating astronaut the personnel hoist, but at that moment Lewis called a warning that the detector light had flashed on the instrument panel, indicating that the metal chips were in the oil sump because of the engine strain. Considering the implication of impending engine failure, Lewis told Reinhardt to retract the personnel hoist while he called a second helicopter to retrieve Grissom. Suddenly, Grissom realized that he was not riding in the water as he had been. All the time he had been in the water, he kept feeling air escape through the neck dam. The more air he lost, the less buoyancy he had. Moreover, he had forgotten to secure his spacesuit inlet valve. Swimming was becoming more difficult, and now the second helicopter, moving in, Cox tossed the horse collar lifeline straight to Grissom, who immediately wrapped himself into the sling backwards. Lack of orthodoxy mattered little to Grissom now, for he was on his way to the safety of the helicopter, even though the swells junked him twice or more before he got aboard. His first thought was to get a life preserver on. Grissom had been either swimming or floating for a period of only 4 or 5 minutes, although it seemed like an eternity to me, he said afterward. As the first helicopter moved away from Grissom, it struggled to raise the spacecraft high enough to drain the water from the impact bag. At one point, the spacecraft was almost clear of the water, but like an anchor, it prevented the helicopter from moving forward. The flooded capsule weighed over 5,000 pounds, 1,000 pounds beyond the helicopter's lifting capacity. The pilot, watching his instrument's red warning light, decided not to chance losing two crafts in one day. He finally cast loose, allowing the spacecraft to sink swiftly. Martin Brines aboard the carrier suggested that a marker be placed at the point so that the spacecraft might be recovered later. Rear Admiral J.E. Clark advised Brines that in that area, the depth was about 2,800 fathoms, or 2.3 miles. The recovery of Liberty Bell 7. After several unsuccessful attempts in 1992 and 1993, Oceaneering International Incorporated lifted the Liberty Bell 7 off the floor of the Atlantic Ocean and onto the deck of a recovery ship on July 20th, 1990. After Liberty Bell 7 was secured on the deck of the recovery ship, the Ocean Project, experts removed and disposed of an explosive device, the SOFAR bomb, that was supposed to detonate in the event of the spacecraft sinking, but which failed to explode. The Cosmosphere in Hutchinson, Kansas, disassembled and cleaned the spacecraft, and it was released for a national tour through September 15, 2006. The spacecraft then returned to the Cosmosphere, where it was on permanent display. In 2016, it was temporarily lent to the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. Thank you for watching the history of the Mercury-Redstone 4. Have a great day. Bye-bye.